Hi, guys. Do you ever feel like you're shooting yourself in the foot by getting the wrong tenants time and time again? How about you get frustrated because you have been working too hard on your business and you have too little time to yourself and you're just feeling like landlord's taking up all of your time? Well, you're in the right place because tonight we're going to be talking about how to attract the right tenant and how to build systems that make things easier with technology. And then we're also going to be talking about good investments for 2023 for real estate investors. So my name predictably is Nelda Schulte, just like the back of my stand-up banner here. And my business is neldaschulte.com. And I'm really happy to be joined tonight by Gil Donkersgood from BC.
Hello.
And I'm really pleased to have Hart Togman, who is the CEO and co-founder of Rent Panda, who is our special guest tonight. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
So if you want to know a little bit about Hart, he's got a pretty interesting background. He started out as a marketing guy, and he decided, because he and his brother were renters, that they wanted to make the whole rental arena a little bit more warm and fuzzy, a little bit more pleasant experience for both the renters and the landlords, because let's face it, it really isn't a very pleasant place to be a lot of the time. So they founded a company called Rent Panda, and pandas are kind of warm and fuzzy. I like them. I love pandas, actually. They're big and cute in a very big way. And then he's been on a mission to make renting better for the last 7 years. He does a lot of stuff. He also helps landlords with investing, and he's bringing his whole business across Canada. I'm going to let him talk more about that later, but this is a very exciting time to be interviewing Hart Togman, because he's got so many interesting and exciting and useful tips for landlords and real estate investors tonight. You're going to have to excuse me. I got a bit of a cold. Hart also has a cold. We're going to have an exciting after this. We were just talking about how exciting it's going to be for us to take NyQuil and go to bed immediately after the show. So bear with us while we have croaky voices and runny noses, and I hope none of the rest of you are sick. So tonight's topic is leveraging technology, and I'm going to start out by asking Hart, excuse me, what is Rent Panda, and what do you actually do for tenants, and what do you do for landlords?
For sure. Thanks, Nelda. And
I'm really sorry. You can call me the wrong name if you like to. You can call me Debbie or
I was just going to blame you for taking too much NyQuil too soon. Yeah, like you said, Rent Panda was really founded with the vision of making renting better especially for small to medium scale landlords. So my brother and I were both tenants at the time when we founded Rent Panda, and have since become investors and landlords ourselves. But Rent Panda is really all about servicing the landlord community in any way that we can to make that experience better. And what we found very early on was that there were a lot of investors out there, but investing is not necessarily landlording. And a lot of people went into this, with a sexy idea of getting into real estate investing, and then kind of falling when they realize that they're also landlords now. And so we designed Rent Panda to provide those services that a landlord needs throughout their life cycle once they've bought that property. So we help landlords with digital tools. That's a marketplace to list their properties, to syndicate out to multiple listings platforms, to message tenants, to screen them online, both pre-showing and post-showing, to build their leases online, and some property management light software, just kind of making it easier for those landlords who are still doing it all themselves. And then we branched out after enough landlords said, great technology, but can you just do it all for me? We branched out and started to do some tenant placement services as well. So we offer those across Ontario now, and like you said, soon to be across the country. And that's really about having a regional team in place to come out and do the entire leasing operation for those landlords who may be new and a little bit scared about placing the wrong tenant, or they just don't have time on their hands to go through all those Facebook messages, screen all the tenants, and do all the showings, or those people who have kind of moved to start to scale their portfolio and aren't necessarily ready to hand it over to a property manager. Times are tight these days and everyone's looking to pinch pennies. So maybe they're just looking for a little bit of reprieve from that workload of placing a tenant. And then we do a little bit of property management as well. That's the newer endeavor. It's in select cities right now. But for those landlords that are truly passive investors and want full property management, we do some of that too with a little bit of a unique model. But primarily, we really focus on the first two because it's so important to place the right tenant, like we're going to talk about tonight. Not to say property management is easy once that happens, but placing the right tenant is really about securing your investment, making sure you've got rent coming in, making sure you've got good ROI coming through a property, and it really ties together that world of investing and landlording.
It sure does. And I'm really glad that you said that most investors are attracted to the bright, shiny, pretty investing, like getting the great deal, and then they don't know much about what to do with the property once they have it, and they kind of freak out. They're like, now I have to know about the RTA, and I have to know how to write an ad, and I have to take pictures, and on and on and on, right? So it's really glad that people like you and people like me are there to help people with their property investment once they have it. So I know Gil's just itching to ask you about your tenant screening tips. So go right ahead, Gil.
Yes, I would start that by saying we've all learned that probably the most important decision you're going to make after you purchase a property is putting the right tenant in their place, because you're going to make money or lose money based on your tenant selection. So on that note, go ahead and tell us what you know about tenant screening.
Yeah, it's probably a 3-hour conversation.
Yes.
But I'll start on the technology front and just talk a little bit broadly about the opportunities that exist right now. So a lot of landlords, although they come into the world from real estate investing, they are, and I'll speak this way as a landlord myself, they are stereotypically a little bit more old school, a little bit more conservative, and may have done some education and some reading, but they may not be as tech savvy. They may not be aware of all the technology that currently exists in order to make tenant screening easier. And a lot of that, no fault of landlords, but a lot of that is incredibly new. Rent Panda is only 8 years old, and we feel like dinosaurs in the industry. There's some companies that have popped up in the last 2 to 3 years that have really changed the way that we can screen tenants, and primarily in the way of providing transparency to the landlord. And not in a creepy, to steal your information kind of way, but in a logical transparency that really makes sense when you are handing over your largest asset, or what's likely your largest asset, to another stakeholder. And so that leveraging technology is really key. I will say thinking about your tenant as a stakeholder is another little micro thing that we could, again, talk about for a long time. But a lot of landlords think about tenants as commodities. There's just going to be a lineup of tenants, and they don't really need to put a lot of effort in. So if you start to think about a tenant as a true stakeholder in your business, that is your investment property and landlording, then you can dive deeper and use this technology to gain that transparency. So some of the basics obviously are pulling credit checks and background checks. I will say in the last year, the media has done a good job of underscoring what we've been saying for a few years now, which is pull your own credit checks. A lot of people are scared about an additional hard check on their credit report. The reality is there's so much fraudulent information out there, and it is so easy with other tech-based tools to create fraudulent documents. So pulling your own credit check directly from a provider, whether it's Rent Panda or Single Key or Rent Faster, any of the providers out there, pulling directly from a source that gets it from TransUnion or Equifax is really, really key. And yes, it'll cost you between $15 and $25, but no one should be taking credit checks provided by agents, provided by other property management organizations, or the tenant themselves. That's number one. Background checks is the same thing. You can get a very cheap RCMP background check on any Canadian for $4 now, I think it is, or $5.
Oh, wow.
There's no reason not to. Yes, 99% of the time, nothing will come up, which is great. But that 1% of the time, you are going to find something that you may not want to, put in your property, or you may want to take into regard. So that's kind of the basic with credit checks and background checks. And then there's two tools that we use with our leasing team, and we have a tool built in that landlords everywhere can use that are relatively new. They're from a company called Verifast, who we're partnered with. And it's the ability to check income and expenses directly from a tenant's bank account. This one does feel a little bit more intrusive to those people who aren't comfortable with open bank checks, but it's the same as signing up for any kind of pad instance or online provider like online banking or whatnot, but you can actually, through the consent of that tenant, tap into their bank account, and it'll pull a report and analyze all of the recurring income and recurring expenses that are going out. So you can actually see payroll deposits, government income, any other sources of auxiliary income that are coming through, as well as any expenses going out. So if your main point of calling a landlord reference is to verify that the person paid rent, you don't need to do that anymore, because you can see that this person has paid rent, and it can pull up to 12 months prior. So, calling past landlords is still important, but it gives you transparency into the last 12 months. And if someone is stating that they worked at this company and they provided, a proof of employment in some way, whether it's a pay stub or letter of employment, again, you can't pull that necessarily directly from the employer all the time. So this income verification will actually show you those payroll deposits. Now, it doesn't cover all tenants, people who are self-employed, who are getting one-time deposits at the end of the year, or non kind of sequential payroll deposits. There may be some gray area, but for a large majority of tenants, it does help. And then the final thing is ID verification. So again, the government has databases. We have a way of tapping into those databases. And when someone uploads their ID to the system, we can actually cross-check to make sure it is a real ID and it's a registered ID. And then we pop open their camera, take a picture of their face, and make sure it's actually them who's uploading that document.
Wow.
One that doesn't match it. So
this is so much more sci-fi than even in the last couple of years.
Yeah, like 5 years ago, none of this stuff existed.
Yeah, no, the last two things you're talking about, where you can go into their bank account and where you can take a picture and verify their income, those didn't exist.
Yeah, and very transparently, we've only integrated with those partners in the last, I would say, 18 months. And so these are new tools that we've put out and we've started to use as a leasing company. We're doing dozens and dozens of leases every week. So we can test out these tools. We can see the adoption rates. We can see if tenants are open to open bank checks or not. And then once they get used and picked up, we can provide that to the broader landlord audience for their use.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Wow.
That's a little bit of technology. And then I would say the other common mistake that landlords make when reviewing tenants is not really diligently looking at the qualitative. And so a lot of landlords will just say, oh, I have a good or bad gut feeling about someone. Mm-hmm. But there are actual systems that you can put in place. And you guys probably know these because you've experienced property management and tenant placement. But there are systems that you can put in place to check for very specific things that you've set up during an in-person showing, and you can constantly compartmentalize and analyze. So when we do showings, we send out calendar invites, again, through technology, through Calendly or a Rent Panda integration, to set up a meeting, and we provide instructions in that meeting invite. We say, please call me upon arrival. Please text me a few hours before your arrival to make sure you're coming so that I don't waste my time going out and showing the place. Please park on the street or in an auxiliary parking lot so you don't block in current tenants. Even if there aren't current tenants there, we still do that one. And then when the people show up, did they call us beforehand? Did they text us a few hours before? Where did they park? Those are all little notes that we take during that showing process. In the same way, a lot of the times when you're buying and selling homes, you walk in and you see those signs on the door saying, please take off your shoes. We purposefully don't put a please take off your shoes sign on the property. And we train our leasing specialists to notice and take note of the fact of whether or not people took their shoes off unprompted. And so it's just little nuances of seeing whether someone respects the property. And an experienced landlord will say, I had a good gut feeling or I had a bad gut feeling. But if you're a first-time landlord or you've only done this 3 or 4 times, there are actually systems that you can put in place or experts you can hire with those systems to really note the qualitative. So that's kind of like the top line, or we could talk about this forever, but happy to
I think
dive
that's great, because you're seeing if people follow instructions. Not only are they following instructions, or are they being respectful of the person who is showing them the property and respectful of the property, because those are 2 huge areas for any tenant and for any landlord. If they're not going to follow your instructions, if they're not going to take you seriously, if they're just going to do whatever the heck they want, you don't want them.
Yeah, and the last thing on that, I did forget it, but when we train our leasing specialists to converse with people at the showings, we're walking them through it as if we were a real estate agent representing them. So we're showing the property off, we're talking about the property, but we train them to ask open-ended questions and leave very long pauses. So it becomes uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
But you ask someone, what do you do for a living? Or what are you looking for in a home? Right? What are you looking for in a home is one of my favorite questions, because it starts to unpack, why they're moving, what they like about your property, how their search is going, what they're finding with, the family dynamic of the search. And if they're not responding, or if they give me a one-word answer, again, we train our people to just kind of sit there and silently stare at them for 7, 10 seconds until they fill that gap. And people will naturally look to fill the gaps in silence, fill that awkward silence, and they'll usually fill it with any dirt that you want to know as a landlord.
I actually write about that in some of my articles, and I've written about that in my book as well, because I talk about how people feel silence and how you should be absolutely quiet, as hard as it is to do.
For sure.
Oh,
I thought we were all just
those
going
are
to
excellent.
for a while.
Sorry?
I said we should have just all paused there for a while and seen how long we could
Just
sit.
stared at each other. Yeah, see if anyone wants to talk.
One thing that I will throw out, just in support of what you said, is yes, you have to spend a few dollars on a credit check or a few dollars on the background check. But if you let someone like that buy you, it's going to cost you a lot more
Oh,
than those checks have cost you. So we always found it was well worth it, and we did find people that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people, on the note of not investing up front, a lot of people go into advertising without the notion of spending on advertising. And I'm obviously biased. I come from a world of professional advertising. But when you look at a rental property, it is your business, and your asset is this property or this unit, or this home. And spending money to attract the right people is important. Whether you're selling a can of Coke or a General Motors vehicle or a unit in a house, attracting the right tenants and paying to do so is really kind of the pre-step to screening, because your screening job will get a hell of a lot easier when you have quality tenants who are naturally attracted to the property. And so, taking good photos, educating yourself with, the investment of time, or paying for professional photography and videography, taking the time to write a good ad that is catered to a specific tenant profile. If you've
Yes.
got a home that is going to attract young families, make sure you note what it will attract them, the parks, the schools, the playgrounds, the assets that the home has. Too many times we see people who say, I'm looking for families, no students, no smoking, no pets.
yeah.
It's not about what you don't want. It's about what someone who you want will actually find attractive in that advertising.
Yes. Plus, you don't want to violate any human rights codes when you're writing your
For
ads.
sure.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly.
And
Yeah,
then,
Samantha Glass was on our program. She's a paralegal in Ontario, soon
Mhm.
to become a lawyer, and she was representing a woman who was being sued for $100,000 in Ontario because she wrote something in one of her landlording ads that violated the human rights code. So yes, you have to be careful about what you write, not just because of who you want to attract, but who you don't want to tick off.
Yeah, for sure. And you never know who's going to pursue that listing and then get you to admit things in writing that will then be used against you. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's definitely important. And even when it comes to advertising the property on platforms, a lot of people will avoid avoid paid platforms and go to free. We also use free platforms and then pay to promote them. So Facebook Marketplace is a great example where putting up a property unpaid will typically get you decent traffic, but putting up a property with even $30 or $40 behind it will greatly accelerate your search process and bring more tenants to you, yes, but if you screen them efficiently with your systems, it will speed up that process of filling the vacancy.
Mhm. Yeah, and certain tenants are attracted to certain platforms too.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
was the other thing we discovered when we ran hundreds and thousands of ads during property management days. So yes, excellent.
Yeah, and
So-
we found too that different areas of the country would be more inclined to use different marketplaces as well. So Facebook was one, Craigslist was one. there was a couple here. So it depended on where you were.
Yeah, that's actually the true inception story of Rent Panda was the experience that my brother Richard had in Thunder Bay. So we started the business up in Thunder Bay with the dominant marketplace that was in Thunder Bay. I won't name it, but there was a dominant marketplace, and the way that you would find properties in Thunder Bay was peruse a very short list of addresses on the website, and then you would e-transfer an individual $20 and get a Word document of all of the listings in town for that week sent to you
Wow.
by email. And this was not 1990. This was 10 years ago in Thunder Bay.
Oh, wow.
And it was the highly dominant platform there. So everything is hyper regionalized, and that's what we found too. With as a leasing company, we need to make sure that our marketing tailors to not only the tenant profile but the geographic region.
Mhm.
And there are regions where rentals.ca has more traction, Sumper has more traction. Facebook Marketplace is typically beating everyone these days, especially in the last 2 years. But other platforms definitely still have a decent following with certain tenant groups.
Right. So how do you hire somebody to lease out your property? How you're getting somebody good to manage your property? Do you have a system for that as well?
For landlords, a little bit, but I would say the key to finding a good leasing specialist and or property manager is really to educate yourself on the systems that are necessary in order to find and manage good tenants,
Yeah.
and then make sure that the expert or the professional that you're hiring has those systems in some way, shape, and form. And so a good leasing specialist will be able to talk about the nuances of marketing and advertising a property. They will be able to rifle off the platforms that attract certain tenants. They should have a good understanding of what the rent is for specific property types within a range in your area at that time of the year. It shows that they're renting properties, they're up on the current status. They should have systems to screen lots and lots of people simultaneously, quickly, and efficiently. And so, for instance, if a leasing specialist were to say to you, I ignore all of the "is it still available" messages that come through on Facebook Marketplace, that's not someone I would naturally trust, because Facebook has taught tenants that "is it still available" is an appropriate message to send to people, and they put it there as a big blue button that's easy to press. So you don't want to lose out on the volume of "is it still available" messages and the potentially good tenants there, just because someone isn't willing to spend the time to siphon through them and find the good people. So really educating yourself first as a landlord is very important, and you don't want to be the blind leading the blind. You don't want to just put someone in charge and not even know if they're doing a good job or bad until something goes really, really wrong.
So specifically, they need to know what are the landlord and tenant rules in Ontario that they need to know?
They need to read the RTA a few times over for sure as a starting point. They need to read forums. There's the Landlord Self-Help Center. There's educational resources like yours, like many others out there. It requires an education, just like entering into any other business does, for sure. I would say it can involve an entry into the world of Facebook groups, but definitely not a reliance on advice of others in Facebook groups. And it's the same in real estate investing as in landlording. You need to build a power team and not rely on yourself to do everything. So building your team of people who are open to educating you is also incredibly important. So if your property manager isn't willing to explain why they're sending it in for, or what their process for sending it in for is when they actually do it, then that's not a property manager that you want. If your leasing specialist can't kind of educate you through the process of how they screen tenants, that's not someone you want. And a good leasing specialist, a good property manager, will give you the time of day to help steward you through that process in the course of you interviewing them or your first contract or two with them.
So this is something that I found that I wanted to ask you. When I've hired property managers before we started our property management business and after, and you get the person who's the owner, and they can talk a really good game over the phone, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the person who is going to be managing your property. they might manage the business and they might have 5 to 10 other people
Yeah.
who manage 500 properties each. And that person that is designated to be your property manager might not necessarily be responsive, might not necessarily know the RTA, might not necessarily be even following the rules or doing any screening at all. So how do you know that the person that you're talking to is the person who's going to be giving you the service?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would kind of say back to that, it doesn't necessarily need to be a line of questioning that ensures that the person that you're talking to is necessarily managing your property. I would say that the brand experience needs to be consistent through and through. And so what that means is, as a brand ourselves, Rent Panda spend a lot of time and effort building our training processes, our hiring processes, and consistently training our people on things outside of their day-to-day job, educating them on the RTA, educating them on how to produce and submit all of the correct forms, how to converse over email properly or timely communication. So in hiring a property management company, it's okay if they say, I'm Hart, I'm the owner, you're talking to me, I'm going to sell you. But then Mackenzie, our property manager, is going to be managing your property. But A, you want to talk to Mackenzie as well. You want to talk to landlords that have been managed directly by Mackenzie. And you want to ensure that everything that I'm conveying from a brand, perspective and a service perspective is going to be kept through the entire experience, and that the person that you do trust, that you're speaking to, that is going to sell you on that service, they're available if things need to be escalated. So if it's someone that's going to completely disappear off of you, that's not something that you're going to want, because there are always going to be learning curves. I won't say that you're never going to get a newer property manager assigned to your property, especially if you've got a larger portfolio and there's multiple people. But you want to make sure that you do your due diligence there. And then you said a very key thing with the number of properties that someone is managing. And so if the company doesn't have the systems in place for a property manager to effectively manage 1, 2, 3, 500 properties, that property manager, no matter how good, is going to drop balls.
Yeah.
And so you need to make sure that you understand what volume of properties each property manager is assigned to, how their systems work in terms of, is there a centralized office that does leasing and then another that does property management? Is it one individual who does both and has, your entire portfolio under their belt? And just really suss out exactly how their operations work in the same way that you would evaluate your own property management operations if you were to set them up yourself.
Right. So for people who are watching, you're probably thinking, holy, that's a lot of work. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But what I always say, and Hart is saying the same thing, if you don't do the work on the front end, you're going to do a whole hell of a lot of work on the back end. Trash property, bad tenants, you could end up bankrupt. Okay, so where do you want to do the work? You want to do the work on the front end and start your learning curve, because there is a learning curve? Or do you want to do the work on the back end and say, I don't know what happened, help, I think it makes more sense to do the work on the front end.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally, if at the very beginning of an investor's journey, they think about their investment and landlording as a business and not forget the landlording part of it. And landlording may be just assigning a property manager, but you are still a landlord, property owner. It is still your business to run. You're not handing over your business to a property manager. Then if we kind of shift the stigma that's involved in landlording and just talk about it as a business, whatever that stat is, 80-90% of businesses fail within their first 3 years. If that kind of stat existed for landlords, it would shock people into realizing that it is a lot of work and they need to put a lot of effort in. And one thing that we've talked about with a lot of investors and a lot of groups like we're doing tonight is the fad of real estate investing has truly escalated over the last few years.
Oh, yeah.
And so many people are just jumping in because it's a fad. And people are going to lose a lot of money, just like any other fad. It will burn out and there will be a lot of properties dumped back on the market. And those who have educated themselves, those that have invested in the time and money it takes to excel at this landlording game, they're going to be the ones that survive this fad. So that's really my little preach in terms of thinking about landlording as a business and not just forgetting about it once you've invested in the property.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like anything. It's houses are like bodies. I always think they are. You have to feed yourself properly. You have to rest. You have to clean. You have to do maintenance. Occasionally, the wheels fall off, and you have to get things repaired. And houses, it's like the older they get, the more stuff can go wrong with them, and the more stuff you need to kind of be on top of. So. And then the laws, the legislation is always changing. The economy is always changing. You're talking about your brother who was renting in Thunder Bay, and the platform that he used to look for a property. And I think when I first came to Fort McMurray and I owned my first property, where I would place ads, was in the local newspaper. That's where people looked for ads for properties. I mean, that was over 10 years ago, but things have changed drastically since then. So, I mean, you have to kind of stay on top of all of these things because technology changes constantly, the economy changes, demographics change. There's so many things that change, legislation changes, and then your house is getting older. So you have to stay on top of what you need to maintain with that as well. So yeah, it's kind of, think about like your body. You can't say, well, I exercised 10 years ago, it should be good for now. Or I ate a meal about a week ago, I should be good.
Yeah,
You have
exactly.
to feed yourself.
Yeah. And we, as tenant landlord matchmakers, we often talk about an awkward love triangle because it's not just tenant and landlord, but it's actually the unit or the home itself as well. So we have to find the right match between landlord, the asset, and the tenant.
Mm-hmm.
And just like any good marriage, all three of them require consistent maintenance in order to keep a good, stable relationship. So yeah, same thing. I mean, people just don't always think about that asset portion of it.
Yes. Well, why don't we shift to the assets then? So I know Gil wants to ask about investments, and our last speaker, and I did a whole whack of, we just did a big interview with Canadian landlords, or Canadian landlords, Canadian Real Estate Channel, with an Alberta investor and realtor, and he was talking about the trends for real estate in 2023. And I'm really interested in hearing your perspective on this as well. So I don't know, Gil, did you want to ask him something specific about his?
Not specific. I think trends tend to be somewhat non-specific. But if you have a crystal ball,
Yes, pull out your crystal ball, Hart. Let us know.
what do you think are the best opportunities?
So I would say that there's two categories. There's the trends that we're seeing, and then a couple big opportunities. So the trends are the easier ones. They're the non-generic, but essentially, we've started to produce a rent report with our partners Door Insight about 6 months ago, and we've looked at rent rates across all of the markets. We thought that CMHC was doing a pretty bad job at evaluating the whole rental market because they were looking at purpose-built apartments, 4 units or more. And so we looked at a number of platforms and aggregated that data. And the most shocking thing that we saw was it may not be shocking to all, but the affordability obviously was dropping astronomically and continues to drop. But the fundamental nature of affordability having changed was really the key trend that we were seeing. And so most landlords will go into evaluating a tenant thinking that you have to get that 3-to-1 ratio, right? You have to not be spending more than 30% of your income on rent on a monthly basis. And that was untrue for almost every single market that we looked at across the entire country.
Really?
Edmonton was one of the only ones that stood out as somewhat affordable still. But when you looked at both individual and household affordability, a city like Toronto or Vancouver, as an individual, if you were to afford the average home on the average salary, you would be spending over 100% of your salary on rent. And the household affordability was still way up in the high 40 range. And that carried down through a lot of tier 2 markets, a lot of primary markets too. And so that fundamental evaluatory tool of that 3-to-1 ratio or that 30% ratio was just kind of gone. And it truly affected the way that landlords and investors were evaluating tenants and kind of doing their numbers from an investment perspective. So that affordability will continue to drop. Obviously, as rent rates still go up, as demand still goes up, that affordability number is going to continue to drop. The result of that we're seeing on the ground and by the stats is that the rise in non-traditional family units is escalating at an enormous pace. So that's, immigration numbers are obviously going up and affordability is going down. And so when landlords are evaluating tenants, it's very, very common these days to see what we're calling non-traditional family units, which is anyone outside of like a nuclear family renting together. So we have families that are multi-generational that are coming together. We're having young professionals who each individually make $60,000 to $80,000, not bad salaries, grouping together as groups of 3 or 4 to live in 3-bedroom single-family homes. We're having, disparate family households coming together with cousins or student friends or things like that to go beyond their traditional student housing lifespan to continue to rent with others. And that again is fundamentally changing. So when we look at the volume of applicants that are coming through that are non-traditional family units, it's starting to actually outweigh traditional family units, especially in a lot of these rental markets. It's these tier 2 markets that a higher percentage of the population rents. It's not downtown Toronto or Vancouver condos or downtown Calgary housing. It's the cities outside, and so that's something that landlords need to be very aware of and start to consider as viable renter households. The other thing that impacts very often is insurance requirements. So a lot of insurance companies will charge a very pretty premium if you have more than 2, 3, 4 unrelated people in a home. And different insurance companies, define unrelated in different ways. But again, it affects, from an investment perspective, the numbers that you should be putting into your calculations, because it may not be a typical insurance payment that you're putting through. It could double or triple if you account for that 5-bedroom single-family home actually housing 7 young professionals in order to afford it. And then there's the general trend of what people are looking for in a home. And I would say the number one thing that I would love to get out there and just educate people on is pet friendliness.
Yeah.
So it's an astonishing stat of about 57 to 60% of renters have pets nowadays. It's even higher in some cities. We do a lot of rentals in Guelph, and Guelph is a dog town. And, being open to pets not only is something that should be done more to expand your opportunity for bringing those people into a home. You're losing out on 60% of that renter population by not allowing pets, but creating units that are truly pet friendly, fenced in yards or little separate yards, making sure your vinyl flooring is, pet resistant and scratch resistant, so that you're not worried about scratches on your hardwood floor and you're putting in good investment dollars. Those types of things are really going to increase the value of that investment in the long term. And if you were to put out an ad that, the first sentence says pet friendly, 3-bedroom home, you are automatically going up to the top of that list for 60% of the population who isn't going to give up their family dog in order to rent out a place.
No.
So it's a natural way to attract really great tenants. And there's no data showing that pet owners are worse tenants or there will be more damage to a unit because of pets. There's a lot of horror stories that are told in Facebook groups and in the media, but there's no data to show that it will cost more from a damages perspective to house pets.
I've always had a belief too that a lot of people would rather traumatize their kids by moving to a new neighborhood than traumatize their pets by going to a strange place. So you may well have a much longer term tenant as well.
Yeah, for sure. And
although, something that always surprised me when we were property managers was how many pets people had, because I thought, if you can't afford to buy a house, why would you have like 4 or 5 pets? Okay,
yes.
All you have to do is have a sick pet, one trip to the vet, that could easily be $1,000. So if they're struggling to pay their rent and all their other expenses, how are they going to afford 5 pets and a trip to the vet and pet medication and all that other stuff? Like, the logic wasn't there for me. I didn't get it.
But I think that brings up a really good point of screening people who have pets slightly differently, or just adding on to that screening. And so, a common question we ask when someone says that they have pets, which is great because they're divulging that because we have pet friendly places, is do you have pet insurance? And so, a lot of people, again, with that long pause of the question, if they don't have pet insurance, they'll talk about how they're saving properly in order to afford a potential issue that comes up. We talk to them, we say, hey, we have pets too. We love dogs. Where do you go in the area to walk your dog? And you start to get information on, whether the pet is being cared for properly and what type of pet owner they are. And a lot of great pet owners show responsibility for the things that they love. And if they love your home, they're going to be responsible for it.
I suppose too, you could, in the reference checks to the previous landlord, how the pet behaved could be a valuable question.
Yeah, for sure.
I know
And
people
then-
who ask well, I mean, I can't always do this for my properties, but because they're remote, but some landlords I know will actually screen the pet when the pet comes in. They say, bring your pet with you when you come to view the property, and they see how the pet behaves, how they talk to it, whether it's all over the place or, all that kind of stuff. I don't allow puppies because puppies do damage your property. Pee all over the place, they chew on things, disturb the neighbors.
The other thing that we very much stress is a proper move-in inspection, which I would say 80% of landlords that we speak to don't know what it is and don't know how to conduct one. But a very proper move-in inspection will provide great leverage for even minor damages that aren't normal wear and tear. So that puppy that's chewed those baseboards up, your brand new baseboards that you just put in, with a move-in inspection, those would all be documented, would be photographed, and that move-in inspection signed by the tenant on move-in day could actually provide a bit more leverage. No one wants to end up at the landlord-tenant board or end up at small claims because it's not going to be worth it. But it does provide that extra leverage when someone does move out or when you do a routine inspection, they'll have that move-in inspection document that they've signed and acknowledged. So, landlords just need to, again, educate themselves on how to properly protect themselves. And if you're not open to pets, just acknowledge that you are losing out on that population. It may take a little bit longer to rent out. You may not be able to get that extra little bit in rent that you could get from a pet friendly place. So just keeping that all in mind as the nature of the investment.
Oh, something else I wanted to mention is that in Ontario, you're not allowed to charge a pet deposit, but in Alberta, you can.
Correct, yes.
So like people here in Alberta do all kinds of creative things they'll charge a monthly fee for a pet and a pet deposit, or they charge a pet deposit, or they ask for pet insurance. Isn't that common in Alberta? Yeah. I'm guessing it's more common in Ontario.
Yeah.
But we can charge a pet deposit in addition to a security deposit, and we can make it non-refundable. And then you can charge by the type of pet that they have and the size and the number of pets. Right. So big difference between Alberta and Ontario.
I mean, even just the security deposit would be amazing for landlords to be able to charge. And I think what we educate a lot of landlords on is building in the cost of what would be a pet deposit into your lease naturally. So if we're putting up, a 3-bedroom home for $2,800, mark it as pet friendly, advertise it as pet friendly, welcome those pets through the door, but charge $2,950 instead of $2,800. Yeah. And you're building that rapport. Don't spend that $150 that comes through. Just start to build your own insurance policy for potential pet damages that may come up.
Right. Yeah. I'm seeing pets everywhere these days. I'm seeing pets in stores. I'm seeing pets in restaurants, things that I never saw before. So with the workplace, there are bring your dog to work days. I remember going into one workplace and they were saying, and Friday is dog day. And I said, what about people with allergies or people who have got religious beliefs where they don't want to be around, dogs or cats or whatever? And they said, we didn't think about that. But I'm seeing that more and more often in the workplace where, anyway, I've got pet allergies. So any house that I live in can't have pets, but my properties that I don't live in are pet friendly because I don't want to lose out on the 60% of the population who do have pets.
For sure. So those are my trends, and then the opportunities, which are probably the juicier bits. There's really two, and I'm sure there's lots of opportunities, and different investors with different lenses will see it differently. The first is the smaller opportunity that's particular to certain regions and certain cities, but is definitely true across the country when you look at those pockets, is the massive shortage of student housing across the board, and the opportunity over the next 1 to 4 years for investors who are willing to invest in quality student housing. When I say quality, it doesn't have to be five-star luxury student housing that's available. It just has to be quality rooms that students want to live in, that are student-friendly and student-minded. We, as an example, I mentioned Guelph in Ontario before. We rented out properties in Guelph earlier this year that were going over $1,000 a room for each room, and it wasn't even that close to the university. And the universities are over enrolling. They're trying to push more and more enrollment because they lost out a little bit during the COVID years. And with the prices of rent escalating, the affordability of rent decreasing, that's pushing quite hard on the student population. But if there is relatively affordable student housing available, it can be an incredibly lucrative opportunity for investors, because ultimately parents are typically paying. And those parents are willing to pay above market rent in order to get their kids out of their house and into a safe and reputable place. So it's a massive opportunity, and that shortage is not slowing down in a lot of communities. So take a look at the university enrollment numbers, take a look at the prices, the average prices of rooms on student housing platforms to get a good gauge, and on generalized platforms like Facebook Marketplace. And you can quite easily find a dozen, 2 dozen student rental markets that are very good opportunities over the next few years. And then the second opportunity is somewhat in line with that, but it's really the missing middle. So because of this fad of real estate investing and a few other factors at play, the middle range of rentals is really shrinking faster and faster. And those people who would be traditional renters, whether lifelong or for a set amount of time in their lives, the ability to afford a rental is decreasing, and they're having to collapse into these non-traditional family units. They're having to just relent and live in squalor and really bad housing. And a lot of investors go into their investment thinking they have to take a property that exists, they have to gut it, they have to put in, hardwood flooring, beautiful quartz countertops, dishwashers in every unit, full laundry in every unit, absolutely top of the line everything to attract the best tenant possible, because they want the absolute best rent possible. And whether they're refinancing and they want the best, appraisal and whatever their strategy, more and more people are pushing towards the highest end of the rental. And there is a massive gap in the middle. There's a massive gap for good quality housing that isn't, cheap housing, but good quality housing. And maybe it has shared laundry that's coin operated. Maybe it doesn't have a dishwasher or just has a little countertop dishwasher. Maybe it doesn't have brand new, quartz countertops. It can be laminate countertops. But there's a huge opportunity to house this middle of the entire rental population that is really diminishing day by day. The inventory just isn't there. So those landlords that can come into the market and produce affordable, not affordable housing in its traditional term, but affordable units that are in the middle range there, that are at standard market rent, not constantly pushing rents higher and higher, a huge lucrative opportunity there.
That's really interesting. Well, actually, we saw that even before COVID. We had a couple clients who had, I don't know, multi-million dollars in rentals, and they had the mid-range properties, and there was a huge market for that. There were a lot of people who had their own businesses, young families, people who were not really high income earners, like they weren't in the over the $100,000 mark. They were making a decent income, but they weren't making tons of money. They couldn't afford to live in a really fancy place. And then oddly enough, the multi-million dollar properties that we rented, we didn't rent that many. The people who owned them didn't want very many people to live in the property. So they had 10,000 square feet of space, and they only wanted 2 people in there. One guy told me he had a family of 4 there, and he didn't realize the mother-in-law was moving in. she wasn't posing any kind of a threat to damaging the property, but as far as he was concerned, that was too many people in his house. He only wanted 3. So he was asking me to re-rent it, to ask them to, he asked them to leave
Right.
and find another place to live so that he could rent it to just 1 or 2 people.
Yeah.
Your point does make sense though, because there's going to be a lot more people in the mid range than there is going to be on the upper range. So you've got a bigger selection to choose from if you've got that property.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's supply and demand, right? And as that top range gets higher and higher and more saturated, that middle is going to be left out, and there's a surge in demand for that somewhat affordable rental. And it doesn't mean you're not going to be able to get great rents and great tenants. It just means you have to be open to not the doctor, lawyer, double income family with no kids, no pets, and only 1 car renting your place.
Well, we've got a friend who has a business where she only deals with rentals in what's considered the worst part of town, but actually the properties are very nice. It's just an older part of town, and it's kind of a more of a blue collar sort of area, or a lot of retail in that area. A lot of people there work retail, and she never has a problem filling the properties. And she gets good tenants who stay for years and years because that's affordable for them, and it's the area that they work and they live in, or maybe their family lived there and they want to live there too. So I think your insights are fantastic, Hart. Like, really, thank you for all of these. Well, not just the crystal ball, but the stats. I haven't seen stats like this. Like, as you said, the rental market, they only talk about apartment buildings. They don't talk about condos and duplexes and fourplexes and single family dwellings. They just focus on apartments, and so we don't get all the insights that you gave us.
It's always been a frustration, so I'm glad you've got that information.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was one of our earliest frustrations. And my brother was an academic by trade, and he was looking at the data that was available as we tried to build the business, and it was so skewed towards large urban centers because of the apartment density there. And we were operating in Thunder Bay, and there just wasn't data available. So thankfully now the data is getting a little bit better. I would say it's still sparse when it comes to an academic lens, but month over month, we're able to build that data set. We're able to hone things in, and hopefully we can start pushing people towards these lucrative investments, filling the gaps that exist in the housing situation that exists in Canada with more reliable data. And ultimately, I think it's about 68% of all of the rental housing in Canada is owned by small to medium scale landlords.
Mm.
A large percentage of that is not purpose-built rental.
Yeah.
So if we can start to capture 68+% of the rental inventory, the data will look quite different. And I think that there's down the road, hopefully there's going to be policy changes influenced by it. But at the start, we can push individual investors and groups of investors towards solving some of the housing problems in the country.
That would be brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm big on stats and all that stuff too. So knowing this information is going to become accessible just excites me.
Yes. Thank you so much for compiling all of that and sharing it with us. That's really amazing. So, Grant, I have been enlightened by your interview here. So if people want to get hold of you, they want to get hold of Rent Panda, and they're in Alberta or BC or Ontario. How soon can people get hold of you or access your services if they're in Ontario or BC?
Yeah, so if you're in Ontario, you can access all of our services right away. If you're across Canada, we have some of the digital services available already, a lot of the screening tools. But ultimately, wherever you are, I would say go to rentpanda.ca and contact us either through the website or at hello@rentpanda.ca. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. We're always putting out educational content, releasing new tools, releasing new services. And that announcement of us going national will come on all of those platforms. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be chatting again, and I'll be telling you we are officially national. But until then, just go to rentpanda.ca and get in touch with us, and we can help out in some way, shape, or form.
So I'd be interested in putting some of your stats in my book.
Sounds good. We should
because
chat.
This is a Kindle publication, so that means that I can update it electronically. And I wanted to align with Ontario, and I also want to align with BC so that there's just as much information for them about BC and Ontario as there is for Alberta. This book is obviously top heavy in Alberta because that's where I live, and that's where I've been a property manager and a property investor. But we obviously want to expand outwards. So yes, that's why it's really good to align with people like Hart. So Hart, thank you so much for joining us. You were an absolute wealth of information and a lot of new information, which was really excellent to hear and very enlightening. And you even did this when you were sick. So you deserve a special place in heaven, special little medal for Hart. So if people want to get hold of you, they know how to get hold of you. If you like this video on YouTube, like it, share it. Find me on YouTube, find me on Facebook on Alberta Landlords Watch. Find me on Twitter at Nelda Helps Me. I'm also on Instagram, Schulte Nelda. So look forward to connecting with all of you and supporting all of you and offering you excellent speakers like Hart in the future who can support you in your business wherever in Canada it is. Thanks so much for joining us, Gil and Hart. And
thank you.
Have a very good night, and have a good night with your NyQuil and your pillow. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.